Okay, this is our section related to communication leadership, and it focuses a lot on some basic concepts that you probably had about communication. Many of you have had some extra kinds of training, like in motivational interviewing, but there also are a few differences related to how leaders may communicate that are important to take note of, as well as appropriate communication strategies to take with different types of personalities and different kind of recognizing cues in your employees and how to know when it's best to use certain communication strategies versus others. So, why do we want to make sure we're good at communicating as a leader? Obviously, clear communication is been found to be very much related to successful healthcare outcomes, and poor communication in healthcare with negative outcomes. So, not only do nurse leaders have to ensure that the communication strategies used on the unit or with different professionals is clear and understandable for that safety reason, but nurse leaders also need to model that kind of communication in the way they work with their employees, and so that newer nurses have see that something is going to be consistently done, and it becomes then a habit of the way we as an interdisciplinary team all communicate effectively. I know I've given an example in class related to bedside reporting not too long ago in the sense that, yes, that's a communication model and we put it in place in many hospitals, but then when you actually go out as a leader and look at what is happening, the standard for communication has been altered, has been changed, is not really the way you thought it was. And so besides setting up those type of communication methods and modeling that effectively, we also have to really, as leaders, follow up to see that those type of models are really meeting the needs, making sure that the healthcare outcomes are positive and that all staff are kind of holding to the same communication models. So these are just some of the definitions. You know, you want to be able to know what's the difference between verbal and nonverbal communication. And how does communication really become interpersonal, meaning that it is at a level of where there is really true deep understanding between two people. And then some of these key concepts like persuasion, negotiation, and bargaining. Nurse leaders have to become very, very talented at persuasion. You know, often you need to convince patients that they may need to do something that's best for them. It may be that you've got to guide your staff along a path to persuade them to come along with you on a mission or a vision that you have for the unit or for the future. Often you have to be able to negotiate. And persuading and negotiating is two different things. It really comes down to how do I get things that I need by using the appropriate communication strategies to ensure that both parties really get a good outcome together. And then bargaining is, in some sense, sort of compromising, which is different than negotiation, in the sense that if I do something for you, then you'll do something for me. And frequently you see that kind of communication strategy because as a nurse leader, I need people to work shifts. I need people to work extra. I need people to do tasks for me. And sometimes that gets into a situation where, as a leader, you have to make a decision on what can you agree to barter with someone to get something done appropriately, and at what point can you still do that? Because if you're going to offer something to one employee, you have to be fair. So you can't always bargain with one person and not bargain with everybody in a similar fashion. So those definitions are really important to know because they really are really relative to the things that happen in day-to-day work as a nurse leader and as a nursing staff member as well. Communication, of course, can be affected by both internal and external variables. Communication takes place on multiple levels of complexity. Sometimes we're appearing as though we're hearing something or really listening when we're not. And then you can know that the right thing has been said, but validation hasn't taken place, or there's too many conflicting things that's going on in terms of communication. We've found that communication is very difficult to measure. That is the focus of my research interest, and so there's lots of, there is a true lack of standardized instruments that can best measure communication. So part of my dissertation work was to try to validate one of the instruments that's out there that actually measures nursing presencing, or the ability for nurses to really have a deep communication connection with their patients. These next couple slides really talk about some of the things that are going on around you when you are trying to communicate. When you think about, you have your own preconceived thoughts and ideas often, and your own values, and so the way other people communicate, words they use, their body language, their tone of voice, the way they come across in doing it, whether we look at the diversity of people in terms of gender, cultural differences, different upbringing, different history, and then individual experiences and education and roles that they're in at the time of the communication versus other roles at different times, their own skills and knowledge and ability, and all of those things that go around you as an individual are also going around the person that's trying to communicate with you. So these are why communication so often is misinterpreted or misunderstood, is because of this huge variety of these kinds of concepts that have to do with how well communication takes place. So I know you've all had some training at some point, probably in a psychology class or a public speaking class, that really talked about the effect of, nonverbal communication. And, it really is a whole lot of what your physical attributes are in terms of the communication style that speaks so much louder than the actual words that you use. I'd like you to look at this face. When you think about somebody that looks like they've kind of got a scowl on their face a lot, or they're really busy, or they're really intent, they're looking at something, they're not like looking at you, they walk around with a kind of face like this on. Some people don't always control their facial expressions very well, and they often are not very astute to what your own facial expressions are, whether you're rolling your eyes. Some of those kinds of actions really can have a detrimental effect on the communication that's taking place, to the point that some people will not even want to talk to somebody that has some of these attributes, because they are already judging that there's going to be a negative interchange, or a negative, not a well understood or well connected conversation with somebody. And so being very astute to look at those kind of things in other people, give other people feedback, being open to getting feedback about your external things is very, very helpful. I like to give an example too of one time I was on an elevator and I had an employee that had been having some performance problems, and the person was on an elevator with me, and it was very crowded, and we had to be right almost up on top of each other where we stood. And I know that after this person, I talked about this later, being in a closed space with somebody very close, too close, body distance, spatial distance, probably created a situation where somebody was a little bit more on edge when they had to meet together. I also know of a instance where I had a nurse manager that worked under me that had a very, very tiny office. And when she would meet with her employees, she really just had two little chairs in there, her chair and one other, and she might be having a difficult conversation with an employee, and they were almost knee to knee, facing each other, which made for an uncomfortable communication, particularly if you had feedback that wasn't always positive about somebody's performance. So an astute leader has to think about all of those kind of peripheral things prior to planning to have some communication. Even when you're having a staff meeting, how do you position yourself, or how do you interact with different people around the table that are in that meeting? Do you have where you're standing at a podium and speaking down to people, or are you at their level? Lots of things that we attribute to patient communication also apply to how, as a leader, would communicate best with their employees. In healthcare, we have a lot of safety concerns. That's one of the National Patient Safety Goals, is to improve caregiver communication. So many agencies that deal with quality at the national level have focused on developing quicker ways through a program called Team Steps and a few others that really give us key ways to say things kind of in a scripted way, so that we are ensuring that our safety concerns get met. You see Team Steps incorporates this thing called the CUSP model, where when you're feeling like you can't maybe speak to another colleague or a physician, but you know that it's a safety issue and you really have to speak up, the best way to do it is to use the acronym CUSP and say, I am concerned, I'm really uncomfortable with this new order or with this action or with this situation. I really feel this is a safety issue. Can we talk about this some more? And it's very good method for opening up and having the confidence to open up some difficult conversations. The DESC script is also another one of those models for a way to resolve conflict. You guys will have a conflict resolution group activity in a few weeks, so this would be one to keep in mind. But it just gives you a way to kind of think about it together with another person to make sure that you're using models that have been proven to help. Again, motivational interviewing is one of those things that you guys have already had some training in. There are some scales called evidence-based practice nursing leadership scale and work environment scale that are some few tools that are out there that help measure some of communication. We've already talked a little bit about transformational leadership, so I won't reiterate that. Good leaders listen more than talk. They have to be open to new ideas. They cannot be dictatorial often, as we've already mentioned. That style is not real effective. And they have to be really create a culture of safety, that things are focused on. They're transparent as much as they can by law be, and really show some empathy. So watch the video and watch some of the tenets of this 5-minute video when you get a chance, and then we'll continue on.